Hello.
Hello.
That's right. It is YouTube time this time all the time.
If you like poetry, if you like literature, if you like cultural history, then you've come to the right place. We make podcasts about all of those things. So be sure to like and share this video. And of course, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload.
Since we mostly make podcasts, you can also find our shows on all the major podcast platforms. So if you found this video, but YouTube isn't your speed for regular podcast listening, head over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe there.
All right. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Close Talking Reflections, a special series from the most popular poetry analysis podcast in the world. I am your co-host, Jack Rossiter Munley.
And I am your non-whispering co-host, Connor McNamara Stratton.
It's like that verse in Angie where Mick Jagger is like, "Let me whisper in your ear, Angie." And he gets away with it because he's Mick Jagger, but like none of the rest of us can because we're not Mick Jagger.
That was sort of the feeling I had, but I hadn't made that specific connection, so I'm glad you brought all that out.
Indeed. Anyway, this is Close Talking Reflections, our mini series to close out Poetry Month 2020, where we do these sort of quick little episodes on short poems that are particularly good springboards for reflection and meditation, because we're all spending a lot of time reflecting and meditating, whether we want to or not. And poetry can be a really great vehicle to a positive version of reflection and meditation, as opposed to, brooding and and dark thoughts.
Yes, it is. Can be a very fine line. I am well acquainted with a good brood. We're starting with a good one, and maybe we should just jump right in.
Let's do it. Very quickly before that, as always, we really appreciate it if you take a second and give us a rating and review over on the iTunes store / Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to help us boost on the algorithm and find more listeners. Today's poem is a really, really short one. You could say it's a haiku. It's got 3 lines. We did a whole series on haiku last year, and you can figure out whether you care about syllable counting after you listen to that. And then you can return to this episode and decide what you think about the haiku-iness of this particular poem. But this is a poem by Ezra Pound that I came across because of an impulse purchase from last year's AWP, when there was a book of cat poems, and I'm a big old cat guy, and I couldn't resist it. So this is a quick little Ezra Pound poem. Mediterranean March. Black cat on the quince branch, mousing blossoms.
That's a good one. That's one we could have done last year. This is a good bridge. Yeah, I love this. I didn't know that this was discovered from your cat poem AWP purchase. I love that.
It's a book just called Cat Poems from New Directions.
I love New Directions. That's funny because another coincidence is the impulse buy that I made when we were both at AWP was the haiku book that I then relied on extensively during our haiku week last April.
It's all connected.
It is all connected.
All connected. But yeah, I really love this poem, not just because cats are mentioned, though that does have something to do with it, but I like the scene that is described because it is one that is both, to me, when I visualize it and I try to immerse myself in it, it is both very calming and restful, but at the same time contains a lot of action. And I like that dichotomy, and I like that it is captured in such an economy of space, that it is such a complex scene that comes together so succinctly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like, yeah, and we, so I had to look up quince, to be honest. I first was like thinking about quince, which is Spanish number, so it was not that. But it's like a kind of pear, and it's, I think, yellowish. At any rate, we have like a cat that's on a branch of a pear tree, and is mousing blossoms, which is, there's a lot there, but in the kind of most literal action is the cat is sort of eating or like nipping at the blossoms on the pear tree, but in a way that, like, looks like the way a cat might catch a mouse, kind of thing, was what I was reading into it.
Definitely. And I love that description so much, both because it's just a great creative use of language, but because the term mousing then can encompass so many different actions that the cat is doing, it draws the scene out. It makes it a longer scene because you can imagine the cat doing a lot of different things. You can see it hunker down and stare at a blossom that's moving in the breeze, and then pounce on it, and then swat at it, and then bite it. Like, you can really, mousing blossoms turns it into this whole long activity that you can see this cat taking part in, that just goes beyond the bounds of the poem. And I really love that, because it would be so easy to say, catching blossoms, swatting blossoms, nipping blossoms, catching blossoms, whatever, but mousing.
Yeah, no, and it's great too, because the verb, even like the verb, like when it's used sort of in its most basic context, is also very interesting, like to mouse, because it's like, it's almost like to Google or something, where like the thing that is the direct object has become the verb or whatever. So like the cat mouses is just like very, it's just interesting, and it's so cool. Like, everything you said about it is great, and it was making me just think, like, also the fact that it's like mousing, like the ing word, kind of a lot of times, actually, I don't know, I feel like the poetry 101 or like composition 101 really is like, don't use gerunds or like your ing words, because it's like not as active and like packs less of a punch, kind of thing. But here it's like mousing blossoms is this kind of, in the same way that it's like a more expansive action that sort of like encompasses a lot more of what the cat might be doing, it also like stretches it out to like, more of, like, it could be doing it for who knows how long. It's like it's less of like a singular moment and more like a kind of stretched out image, kind of thing. And it's like, this is maybe like too nerdy, but it's just funny. It's like mouse as the verb, which is like from the noun, then becomes mousing, which is like the nounifying of the verb that was nounifying or something. And I like that a lot.
Almost like the language is being as agile as a cat in its movements.
Yeah. And it's just mousing blossoms. So one thing about this week that I was kind of thinking about, like, just, I don't know, what kinds of, what kinds of like ways of thinking about poems or approaching poems might be like especially interesting or thoughtful or whatever, during, for this week. And we focus a lot on sound, obviously, because we got poems and we're a podcast, and so we've got the audio medium. But I was also thinking of like the joy that I have when I'm reading a poem out loud, and like the saying of words that are like so full of good sounds and stuff. And like mousing blossom is just like so nice to say, because you got the like It's like a sandwich of M's. And then we have like the middle, it's like filled with the S, the mouse and the bloss. And then we have different kinds of O sounds. Like we have the ow for the mouse, and then the ah and the for the blossom. And we have like mousing blossoms. And then it's just like, I don't know. I mean, you might be in a place right now where there's other people, but if you take a moment to say mousing blossoms out loud, I think, I don't know. It's just like a visceral pleasure that I get. And it also evokes just, this whole dynamic kind of scene that we've been talking about.
I completely agree. It's just so nice to say. And it just feels like it feels both round and flowing, because there's the warm M sounds, which are also the sounds like you talked about, that line being an M sandwich, and the poem kind of becomes an M sandwich because it starts with Mediterranean March and ends with mousing blossoms. It just has that sort of like warm feeling, and
Yeah.
like any good sandwich, you're saying the whole time.
Exactly. Boom. Boom.
Analysis. But it's also just like the S's give it that sense of movement and flow. And I sort of have, as I was saying, I have sort of a similar feeling about that first line, because Mediterranean March can go a lot of different places. You can either picture yourself in the Mediterranean, or it's just a cool way to say that the march that is being experienced wherever this scene is taking place reminds the speaker of the Mediterranean. So kind of no matter what, you're in this like sunbathed, it's a warm March day. John Mulaney has some choice comments on March that will point to how special a Mediterranean March day might be.
March, if winter had spring, March.
But because it's introduced that way, and then you have a black cat, and you know that black is going to retain heat, so you can almost feel the warmth of the cat's fur if it comes over to you after it's done mousing. You just really, the depth of what's going on to create this scene on every single level, and that happens a lot, and we've talked about this on some other episodes about short poems, but when you have few words, to be so conscious of that economy of language and to use it so efficiently and so well is just like really impressive when it's done. Just every word is doing like 3 or 4 different things.
No, you're so right though. And like also, yeah, especially that line, like mousing blossoms sonically stuck out to me first, but then as I was returning to the poem, it's actually like, that middle line, black cat on the quince branch, has like, is almost the opposite in certain ways. And
it's where all the sort of sharp sounds come in. Black
right.
cat, quince branch.
Yeah.
Ack.
Yeah, lots of as. If you're from Chicago, it's great for you. And yeah, there's the k sounds in black and cat and quince. Yeah, and it reminds me, actually, there's this great poem by Galway Kinnell called Blackberry Picking, and it's just like a sonnet about how he loves to eat blackberries, basically. But there's this part where he's like, like, as I'm standing among the blackberries, the ripest berries fall almost unbidden to my tongue, as words sometimes do, certain peculiar words like strengths and squinched, many-lettered, one-syllabled lumps, which I squeeze, squinch open, and splurge well, in the silent, startled, icy black language of Blackberry Eating in late September, which is so good and amazing. And also, yeah, anyway, like quince and branch, and like those are those kinds of one-syllabled words that he's talking about that are like, they've got a lot of meat to them, but they're like very short. And it really, like, black cat on the quince branch, and then it just like mousing blossoms. Just it's like a total tonal shift. But there is also so much joining everything together. You know, the march and the branch have a kind of ch rhyme going on almost. Yeah, as you were saying, the M's of Mediterranean March kind of return. And it's just, yeah, it's so delightful. It's one of those things where it's doing two things that I love so much about poems, which is the poem itself is like so full of rich, complex language texture that it's like wonderful to just carry around for itself almost. But then also the image is so vivid and like kind of weird, in a similar, not quite as weird as our watermelon green Buddha eating Buddha smiles weird, but like, you know, having a cat mousing the blossoms is like a kind of defamiliarizing way of looking at the scene, that it also sort of like refreshes how I am, you know, thinking about, or like, you know, seeing the world. And yeah, it's it's a great one.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially that mousing just throws a little another spin on things towards the end, because really the only other word that could go there that would in any way inhabit that space similarly is hunting, and that's just such a reductive way of saying what's actually going on. This opens up so many more possibilities, and it's so much gentler. I really like that.
Yeah. Should we read it again?
Let's do it. Mediterranean March, black cat on the quince branch, mousing blossoms.
Hey, thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Those reviews help us with the algorithm and are the best way for us to find new listeners.
Do you have thoughts about this poem? Or is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? We would love to hear from you, and there are tons of ways to get in touch.
Yes, you can send us an email to closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. I'm at Jack Rossiter Munn, Connor is at Connor M. Stratton, and the show is at Close Talking.
On Instagram, we are at Close Talking Poetry, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Close Talking.
And speaking of all of those many and varied social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena.
Woo woo!
Woo.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Come back again.
Please come back just one more time.
Door's always open. Okay, bye.
I see ya.